Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 26th of September 2022. The articles that we are going to cover today have been displayed on the screen. And let us now begin the discussion.
Very premature to comment on India getting UNSC veto, says Jaishankar. So External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who concluded a week-long visit to United Nations, said it would be premature to comment on positions countries, including India, are taking on the issue of whether any permanent membership for India to the United Nations Security Council came with veto power. Now, this is a very important statement by Minister of External Affairs, because India has been campaigning very hard for a permanent seat in the council, and currently all 5 permanent members have a veto right. While a number of countries have shown support for India's membership, including US and Russia, the question remains open if this comes with veto rights. Now, if you look at the syllabus of GS Paper 2 International Relations sections, important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate is a part of your syllabus. Not only that, UPSC has frequently asked questions on global institutions. For example, in Mains 2020, UPSC had asked, critically examine the role of WHO in providing global health security during COVID-19 pandemic. As a matter of fact, we had indeed discussed this topic in DNS in great detail, as you can see on the screen. So in the upcoming discussion, we are going to first talk about important takeaways from the Ukrainian crisis. Then we are going to focus on UNSC reforms. What are the current issues with the way UNSC is designed, its functioning? What are the proposals for its reform? And what is the case for India's permanent membership at UNSC? Let us now begin the discussion. Starting with the takeaways from Ukrainian crisis. According to the author, another Iron Curtain is coming down. So all those who do not know about this context, the Iron Curtain was a political boundary dividing Europe into 2 separate areas from the end of World War II in 1945 until the end of the Cold War in 1991. As you can see on the screen, the term symbolized the efforts by the USSR to block itself and its satellite states from open contact with the West and its allied states. And from the current crisis, it appears that another form of curtain is coming down in Europe. Countries allied to Russia and its interests are forming one side of the curtain, and countries allied to the West are coming on the other side of the curtain. Then the second important point highlighted by the author is about untying of nations. So according to the author, the global order has broken down, and events in Ukraine have exposed the United Nations and Security Council of their complete ineffectiveness. Russia's actions in Ukraine may, in terms of refusing to seek an international mandate, seem no different from war by United States in Iraq in 2003, Israel's bombing of Lebanon in 2006, and Saudi coalition's attack of Yemen in 2015. And so according to the author, this might be the beginning of fragmenting of the international order established with the UN. At the same time, we could be seeing the beginning of de-dollarization of economic order. The economic order which is dominated, or the financial system which is dominated by US. Because of the sanctions imposed on Russia, Russia will now increasingly resort to the systems which will now bypass USA, and it will motivate other countries, for example China and Iran, North Korea, to take the same bus. And so gradually, the world may see a non-dollar system emerge which would run banking, fintech and credit systems separately from the dollar world. And finally, this could result in the process of deglobalization. It could put brakes to the massive globalization which we have seen in past 20 to 30 years. So I hope that most of you might have watched this video and have gone through the prelims level discussion. And you might have realized by now that United Nations Security Council is a kind of crisis management body of United Nations. And since it is the most important tool available in the hands of United Nations, it has some very important and prominent powers as well. For example, imposing sanctions on various countries or group of countries. But as we have seen that most of the problems, especially related to law and order across the world, have still not been resolved, and if they have been, the involvement of UNSC has been minimal or in the background. There's hardly any dispute across the world or any internal strife or the fight between two countries which have been resolved due to active intervention of UNSC. And that is mainly because the way UNSC has been structured, the way the powers have been divided among the global powers, and the way that power is used in day-to-day scenario. And so let us see what are the issues with the way UNSC is organized and the way it functions. And when it comes to United Nations Security Council, one of the first objections or the issues which is raised against it is that it does not reflect, or at least the current structure does not reflect the current realities of the global order. So most of us already know that UNSC comprises of two kinds of members, permanent and non-permanent members. So permanent members known as P5, we already know them. So out of the total membership of 15 members, 5 members never change. They never seek re-elections. They don't have to worry about their membership of UNSC. They're always there on the deciding table. So this privileged status of permanent members has its genesis in the foundation of United Nations itself. All of us, even remotely connected to the history of the modern world, know that United Nations was created in the aftermath of World War II, basically to avoid any kind of war in the future. As far as the outcome of war is concerned, we already had 3 clear victors: USA, USSR and UK. So of course, if there were to be any United Nations Security Council, they had to be the permanent members. At the same time, UK was very worried about any kind of future German revival of nationalism, and so it insisted on France becoming a permanent member. At the same time, USA insisted on inclusion of Republic of China, which later on became Taiwan, as the permanent member. So this was in 1950s, but now today is 2021. And you can see that there has been almost no change as to where the actual power lies as far as UNSC is concerned. The P5 members are still the same. Of course, the seat which initially went to Taiwan has now gone to China, but except that there has not been any change. Now that is not to say that UNSC has never reformed. Of course, there are 2 notable incidents. For example, in 1965, the number of elected members, the number of non-permanent members were increased from 6 to 10. So what you have now was implemented in 1965. Initially, there were only 6 non-permanent members. Then in 1971, of course, the seat of Taiwan was ceded to China. So these are the only 2 instances where minor amendments have been made in the organization of UNSC. So now you can understand that there has been very minimal change in the organization of UNSC, especially where the actual powers belong, even though the membership of United Nations has quadrupled in last 30 to 40 years. And so what it does is that it creates 2 major problems with the way UNSC is perceived. The first is with respect to the lack of regional representation in the current structure, which does not reflect the current realities. And the second one is that none of the important regional powers find their place in UNSC. So if you look at UNSC, Europe is overrepresented in the overall structure. There are 3 countries from Europe if you include Russia. So out of 5, around 60% of the power is held by Europe. And there is not a single representation from Africa and South America. And this is astonishing because most of the peacekeeping interventions by UNSC have been done in Africa. Apart from that, countries like India, Germany, Brazil, Japan, all of them, not only big economies in their area, have very good and technologically advanced militaries, and also all of them are democracies, do not find their place in UNSC. And whatever may be their contribution to the global order, they have to contest for non-permanent seat every now and then. And let us now go much deeper into this comparison. Let us see how these countries, the group of 4 countries, India, Germany, Brazil and Japan, which are a group of countries which mutually support each other's inclusion into UNSC, stand with respect to the permanent 5 members. And here is a chart in front of you which shows comparison of these 4 countries, G4, with that of P5 on various parameters, which are population, territory, GDP, UN funding, UN peacekeeping funding, UN peacekeepers, defense budget, military. And so you can clearly see that as far as population is concerned, the world's largest populous country, which stands first in the parameter of population, of course, is a P5 member. That makes sense. But what about the second most populous country? If you are not giving membership to India, you are depriving 18% of the world population any voice at the highest level of global decision making. Similarly, if we talk about economy or GDP in PPP terms, world's largest economy being China and US are permanent members. But world's third largest economy, that is India, fourth largest economy, that is Japan, fifth largest economy, that is Germany, do not find their place in P5. But you have Britain, France as members, which have much smaller economy as compared to India, Japan and Germany. Similarly, if we look into defense budget or active military, India does not find this place despite being in top 3, which matters. So now I hope you can clearly see how the current structure of United Nations Security Council is not reflective of current realities of the global order. Alright, so that is the problem number 1. Then the next important issue or challenge which UNSC faces is the allegation of undue use or advantage given to P5 members owing to their veto powers. Most of the non-permanent members and most of other members who are not a part of UNSC often complain about the misuse of veto power. Now, what are the major complaints as far as possession of veto powers by P5 members are concerned? The first and foremost is that it is undemocratic in its very essence, because democracy by its very meaning means one person, one vote, and veto is an idea which is quite contrary to that. It gives special privilege to some people, debarring others of that same right. And it is quite laughable that one of the important agenda of United Nations is to promote democracy or democratic liberal values across the world and at the same time protect human rights. So since veto power violates equal and full membership to all the members, it is quite undemocratic in nature. But the problems with veto is not limited to its undemocratic nature. It also extends to how and why the reforms have been stalled. Because if you trace the lack of reform as far as UNSC is concerned, more often than not, it is the veto power which is utilized to stall the reform. And the simple reason behind that is that no change in the constitution of UNSC can be brought about by a resolution passed by all the members. And even if one member, that is veto a resolution, it cannot be passed. And the countries across the world, countries like Germany, India, Japan, would still bear these two issues if it were for right cause. But more often than not, veto power has been the main reason behind United Nations' failure to prevent violations of human rights. So for example, most of the resolutions condemning the actions of Israel in Palestine are frequently and regularly vetoed by US. And so no significant action has been taken against Israel for its human rights violations or allegations of human rights violations in Gaza and West Bank. So it's just not the US which is culprit. Even China and Russia are not off the hooks, because when it came to Syrian civil war and the allegations of human rights violations and atrocities committed by the ruling president Mr. Bashar al-Assad, the repeated resolutions were blocked by the combining forces of China and Russia. So these were the two instances where United Nations Security Council failed to actually criticize or pass resolution against atrocities being committed by Israel and Syria. But at the same time, it has also failed to stop invasions by powerful countries. For example, the invasion of Iraq by United States of America on the pretext that the Saddam Hussein government possessed weapons of mass destructions. Of course, no evidence so far has been found in that regard, but still, you know that how that country reeled under US invasion for almost 15 years. And there has been no resolution to stop US from doing that. We all know what US invasion has done in Middle East, especially in Iraq. It not only induced instability in that region, but also gave genesis to one of the most brutal and ruthless terrorist organizations like Islamic State. So far we have looked into two kinds of issues with UNSC. Current structure, which is not reflective of current realities, veto power and its concomitant problems. Let us now look at third and last issue, which is failure of peacekeeping mandate of UNSC. And this problem is just not with the way they carry out themselves when they are in some strife-riven area, but it also deals with what is the outcome of deploying these peacekeeping forces in areas like Africa. And one of the basic and regular complaints which come against the peacekeeping forces is the news related to the human right violations committed by the peacekeepers. There's not one, two, but multiple instances of human right violations like abductions, killings, rape, murder, and various other kinds of problems which peacekeepers have themselves been accused of conducting. For example, in 2016, an investigation revealed where at least 25 minors were abused by around 41 peacekeepers in a single night. At the same time, the maintenance of these peacekeeping forces is very, very costly. But that high cost would still be tolerable if the peacekeepers are able to bring some long-lasting changes in the society, in the polity. Basically, the purpose for which peacekeepers are sent, they fail to achieve that. They are not able to induce any long-lasting peace in strife-riven areas or in disturbed areas. Although as far as they are deployed, some peace is maintained, but that is just a very shallow and artificial peace under the pressure of arms of United Nations. But as soon as they withdraw themselves from the territory, the region again limps back into instability. And two notable examples of utter failure of UNSC has been its mission in Somalia and Bosnia. Because you have to realize that ultimately the regional problems like these arise due to geopolitical and various other local factors. And deployment of these peacekeepers is actually not solving the geopolitical or local social problems. For example, a war going on between two tribes is not being resolved. And so there cannot be a long-lasting peace solution when you are just deploying few soldiers over there. So these are the three main challenges which are often raised against UNSC. And so what is actually the way forward? What are the main proposals which have been put forward as far as a reform agenda of UNSC is concerned? And so the reform proposal of UNSC mainly spans around 5 main topics: categories of membership, question of veto, regional representation, size of enlarged SC, and relationship between UNSC and UNGA. So of course there is demand from across the world to increase the number of permanent members of UNSC. Then the second reform proposal circles around the question of veto, whether it should be continued or whether it should be removed from the UNSC functioning. Third important reform proposal is around the regional representation, in which we have seen how skewed it is. And so it is connected with the first reform proposal. As and when the number of permanent members of the UNSC will be increased, of course, it is expected but not certain that regional representation is going to increase, especially if we talk about inclusion of G4 members. For giving adequate regional representation, you cannot debar most of the current members of UNSC, and for that, you will have to increase the size of the UNSC. And last but not the least, relation between UNSC and UNGA. And on the issue of reforms, the members of United Nations have already made their own groups, somewhat like pressure groups. And these groups have a common agenda of reforms, mostly in terms of membership of UNSC and matter of veto power. So the most famous one being G4, the 4 countries which support mutually each other's membership into Permanent Council. Then United for Consensus, or UFC, are those countries which are united not for reform but united to stall the entry of these groups into the permanent membership of Security Council. For example, neighbor of India, Pakistan, Germany's neighbor, Italy, Brazil's neighbor, Argentina. So basically all those countries which will be directly or indirectly impacted by the entry of G4 into the permanent membership of United Nations Security Council. Then you have African Union, L69 and Arab groups similarly vouching for one or the other kind of reform. So after dealing with issues and how they can be reformed, let us now talk about one of the most important components of UNSC reform, especially from the perspective of civil services examination, and that is India's case for permanent membership. So although India has not been able to actually become a permanent member, but it already has what it takes to become a permanent member. First and foremost, India has been the member of United Nations since its inception. Not just the membership, India has played active role in various processes of not just United Nations but also its various other agencies and fora. Not just being the oldest member, but also India has strong credentials when it comes to its case for the permanent membership. India is a strict adherent of rule of law, not just within the country, but also in its behavior or in its diplomatic relations. And it is one of the most vocal votaries of global norms. When it comes to terrorism, when it comes to trade, or it is about investment or intellectual property rights, whatever it may be. And the latest example being the climate change, India is implementer and promoter of global norms. All those norms which when agreed on a global scale is implemented in India. And so that is why most of the domestic laws in 20-25 years have been a result of international treaties, because India wants to implement those treaties. Of course, possessing strong credentials as far as global rules and regulations are concerned is not something which P5 members themselves follow. For example, US withdrawal from Paris climate deal and then eventual coming back, Chinese behavior in South China Sea, Russia's interventions in Middle East, and American invasion of Iraq are some of the very few examples which suggest that P5 members do not themselves follow these global norms and rules and regulations, but still India has been very adherent to that. No one can deny the fact that India has been very significant regional power in its own right. It is the third largest economy in the world and in second in Asia, and it is the second most populous country across the world and second in Asia. And we have seen in that chart how it is third largest military spender. And so denial of membership for India is actually injustice to United Nations Security Council itself. Then the last and a very significant argument in support of India's membership is that of liberal democracy and its coherence with that of Indian constitution. And the way India's democracy and republic has functioned in past 70 years, it clearly shows that India has capability to accommodate a lot of factions, political views, ideologies, religious communities, castes in a very democratic manner. Hardly there has been violent uprisings because of election results. Of course, India has its own fair share of troubles, not to deny that, but as compared to other countries, India has managed its factions and various ideologies quite well, which in most of the other cases results in violent uprisings and rebellions. And so with such a good record of managing such a factioned polity and society, if India finds its place in United Nations Security Council, maybe we can look at permanent solutions to other global problems, because then India would contribute actively with the experience that it has gained internally. So the next article that we have taken for discussion is about Election Commission's push for internal democracy in parties. So after taking action against registered unrecognized political parties for failing to comply with norms, Election Commission is likely to take up the issue of internal party democracy within the parties next, according to EC sources. Now, oftentimes we read news related to the internal functioning of political parties, which has nothing to do with their public sphere. How are they electing their presidents and state leaders? How are they managing their funds? How are they distributing the tickets? Or what is the procedure they are adopting to select the candidates in elections to states and national parliament? Now you might wonder, how is this related to UPSC syllabus? Now first and foremost, if you see salient features of Representation of the People's Act as a part of your syllabus, Section 29A of RPA deals with very vague provisions enforcing intra-party democracy. But for a second, just forget about UPSC syllabus or Representation of the People's Act. Just think about a scenario where we want to ingrain real democracy in our country, where we just not want to ensure each and every person's right, their empowerment, but also we want representation of all the sections of the society. Do you think it would be real, it would be effective unless and until we have democracy within the parties? Because if you do not have democracy within the parties, what you have is single person or single family controlling the affairs of the party for many decades. What you have is basically criminalization of the politics, because the top leaders are not accountable to anyone as to who they are giving the tickets to. And since there is no intra-party democracy, There is lack of representation of the vulnerable sections of the society within the party as well. For example, lower number of women in politics is because there is no intra-party democracy. There is very less number of SC/ST people commanding top positions in national or regional politics. But when it comes to the real elections, you have to abide by the constitutional provisions, and that is when these parties provide tickets just to meet the constitutional requirement. And so the real democracy will be achieved if and only if India enforces intra-party democracy within the political parties, and that is what we are going to understand. So starting the discussion by first understanding what exactly do we understand by intra-party democracy or democracy within a political party. So if you broadly want to define this term, you can say that it is about implementation of a minimum set of norms within the organization of political parties. Now, this minimum set of norms should provide a bottom-up approach to forming a decision in the party and the internal distribution of power at different level bodies and individuals. Because a lot of issues in our country are being faced because of the lack of rules within political parties. We never know why a person is elected continuously for 40 years as a president of political party. How are the decisions, or how is the manifesto or schemes, a program of a political party is decided within the party? Where is the actual power being located within a party? And if you compare this to that of United States of America, you can easily understand the major difference. The intra-party democracy in United States is so strong that for deciding the contender for the post of governor, president, or for becoming a party president, each and every registered member of a party votes in a county-wise manner. And on the basis of those results, these position holders are elected. And that is real intra-party democracy. But in our case, since independence, the authority in organizational matters has mostly been from the top to bottom. Leadership in most political parties in India may be democratic in appearance, but is highly centralized in reality. And the major reason behind that is that in India there is no legal provision for enforcing internal or intra-party democracy, except for very few and vague provisions given in Section 29A of Representation of the People's Act and few Election Commission guidelines, but they are not enforceable. Let us now first understand why do we need intra-party democracy in a broader sense. And so first and foremost, you need to ensure representation not just in national politics, but in political parties also. The absence of intra-party democracy has contributed to political parties becoming closed autocratic structures. Now this adversely impacts the constitutional right of all citizens to equal political opportunity to participate in politics and contest elections. Then if you have followed the newspaper closely, around the time when elections are around the corner, there is no reason given by a particular political party regarding ticket distribution. So who gets the ticket and why is known to only the party president and few people in power. And so we need transparency in ticket distribution as well, because a transparent party structure with transparent process will allow proper ticket distribution and candidate selection. The selection would not be based on whims of a few powerful leaders in the party, but will represent choice of the larger party. Then currently, the top position holders in a particular political party, and it is applicable to all the parties, are not accountable to public in general and party cadres in particular. And it is extremely important to hold them accountable to their own party structure. It helps party members to hold their leaders accountable and engage in policy decision processes meaningfully, as it would bring in competition, participation, and representation inside the political party. Then comes the issue of decentralization. Through the provisions of the Constitution, we have decentralized the state power. We have parliament at the top level, then we have legislature at the state level, and then we have third level of government or the local governance. And that is more or less sorted. But what we don't have right now is the decentralization of the political power within the party structure. Every political party, although, has a state and local body unit. And so, an election at each level will allow creation of power centers at different levels. This will allow decentralization of the power, and decision making will take place at the ground level, instead of what is happening right now, where even the local body elections and the agenda for them is set right at the party headquarters, either in Delhi or in case of regional parties in the regional centers. One of the biggest reasons because of which we need intra-party democracy is the increasing trend of criminalization of the politics. But this criminalization of politics has a relation with the lack of intra-party democracy. As there is no well-defined process for the distribution of the tickets to candidates before the election, tickets are given to candidates on the vague concept of winnability. This has led to an additional problem of candidates with criminal backgrounds contesting and winning a lot of elections. So much so that number of MPs with criminal charges against them is been increasing in every elections. And at the same time, the existence of intra-party democracy is going to give space for dissent within the party, reducing the possibility of formation of a number of offshoots political party and hence creating a number of regional parties. The best example of this, Chief Minister of Bengal Mamata Banerjee and prominent leader Sharad Pawar. Both of them were prominent Congress leaders and later on, due to lack of intra-party democracy, had to quit and form another regional party. Although whether large number of smaller regional parties or few numbers of national parties is good for India or bad, that is a matter of another discussion, but definitely is going to curb the trend of factionalism and formation of new regional parties. So if intra-party democracy is so good, what are the reasons or the causes behind India not having a proper culture of intra-party democracy? And there are four major reasons behind lack of intra-party democracy. The first one is the culture of dynastic politics. There is so much of emphasis on nepotism in political parties that it has totally killed the chances of providing democratic avenues to other party cadre. At the same time, the culture in India of political parties is that of a centralization of power into very few hands. And one of the main reasons behind that is the 10th schedule, or the provisions of the Anti-Defection Law of 1985, which deters party legislator from voting in national and state legislatures according to their individual preferences. It gives disproportionate amount of power to the party leaders, since they command power within legislative assembly and parliament. That power also percolates beyond the boundary of the legislatures as well. Then, as we have discussed, there is no particular law or strict provision within Representation of the People's Act to provide for or enable intra-party democracy. And somehow, in our country, we have developed a phenomena of personality cult. There is a tendency of hero worship. And many times a leader takes over the party and builds his own coterie, ending all forms of intra-party democracy. Now on this behalf, there exists three major recommendations from Law Commission, National Commission for Review of Working of the Constitution, and second ARC, which directly deal with the intra-party democracy. Now when you're writing an answer in the mains exam, it's more than sufficient to just mention these three bodies or committees and just write that they have recommended institution of intra-party democracy in this regard, but it's good to know some specifics as well. For example, Law Commission's 170th report on electoral reforms dedicated an entire chapter on the necessity of providing laws relating to internal party democracy. National Commission for Review of Working of the Constitution states that there should be a comprehensive legislation regulating and registration of functioning of political parties or alliances within our country. Similarly, the ARC reports on ethics and governance, which is the fodder material for studying the ethics paper GS4, pointed out that the corruption is caused by over-centralization, since the more remotely power is exercised from the people, the greater is the distance between authority and accountability. This is also a good quote which has been given directly in ARC report. So now the question which remains is with respect to the future course of action. What should be done to ingrain intra-party democracy in our country so that it gets reflected in better outcomes overall as far as performance of our democracy is concerned? So first and foremost, as you might have guessed by now, we need a law. We need a statute which should mandate intra-party democracy, mandate internal elections, mandate voting for selection of party positions. At the same time, we should empower the Election Commission of India to ensure the implementation of that particular statute. Or maybe we can amend Representation of the People's Act and insert a new chapter dealing with elections within political parties. At the same time, we know that the provisions of anti-defection law get activated as and when a member of a party goes against the orders issued by the whip of a political party in a legislature. Now, if they are important matters, for example, no confidence motion or adjournment motion, then it makes total sense to follow the party diktats. But when there are issues related to discussion on a particular bill, then it should not be applicable. And if we do that, if we make this amendment to the 10th schedule, it is going to go a long way in ensuring intra-party democracy, better debate within a political party. Then at the same time, just reservation in the final election is not sufficient to ensure the proper representation of the all communities of the society. You need reservation within political parties. So if you are giving reservations to SCs, STs and women in various elections, there's a need to enact and make it mandatory for positions within political parties as well. Only then you are going to have better representation within political parties, which will then be reflected in overall horizon of Indian democracy. At the same time, it must be made mandatory for all political parties to submit their statements of expenditure to ECI within prescribed time limit. Political parties not submitting on time or in the prescribed format should be heavily penalized. The next article that we have taken, midday meal related food poisoning cases at 6-year peak. So in the last 90 days, close to 120 students suffered from food poisoning across schools in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh and Bihar. In last 13 years, data suggests that at least 9,646 such cases of food poisoning were reported. Close to 18% of such victims became ill after consuming midday meals in which lizards, rats, snakes and cockroaches were found. And so in this regard, CAG has audited several states in the past decade and has cited many reasons that could lead to low standards of midday meal preparation, such as poor infrastructure, insufficient inspections, irregular licensing, limited reporting and absence of feedback mechanisms. Now if you're wondering why is it important for us to discuss this news, it's because under GS paper 2, welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of population by center and states and performance of these schemes is a part of your syllabus. Apart from that, in 2013, UPSC has already asked a question on midday meal schemes, and so such schemes are very, very important. So if you're not aware about the basics of the schemes, it is the largest school feeding program in the world with the primary aim to ensure enrollment in government schools. It is a centrally sponsored scheme with Ministry of Education being the nodal ministry for its implementation. The scheme was introduced for the first time in 1995 on pilot basis for children classes 1 to 5. And so when we look at the benefits of the scheme, it is ensuring three things at the same time. It functions as an important tool in ensuring enrollment as well as retention, especially when seen among the students of marginalized sections, that is ST community, girl education. Then it promotes better classroom learning as it tackles the issue of hunger and its associated issues like malnutrition, stunted growth, and hence ensures healthy growth of children. And then it also promotes social and gender equality as children belonging to different backgrounds eat and sit together. So let us now first talk about the issues which have been raised in the report submitted by CAG. But apart from that, we will also look at some of the long reported issues plaguing this scheme. So first and foremost, CAG has pointed out that in Madhya Pradesh, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India did not notify doctors to report food poisoning cases. Further, FSSAI did not have information relating to food poisoning cases that occurred during 2014 to 2019 period. And that is one of the biggest problems. If you are not notifying and making it mandatory for doctors to report the food poisoning cases, how will the national data be compiled so that we can have a clear-cut idea about the current state of affairs as far as the midday meal is concerned? As we all know that the space has to be provided within the school premises for the cooking of the food. But CAG has found out that in Madhya Pradesh, around 14,500 schools did not have a kitchen shed for proper preparation of midday meals. Apart from that, there is a minimum mandatory condition for temperature as far as the food which is to be served is concerned. And that is around 65 degrees Celsius. But CAG has found out that in majority of the schools, the food which was being served was cold and was not heated. When the food is not heated properly, it can become source of infection. Also, it is less palatable when it is served cold. Apart from this, CAG has also found out that there is complete absence of grievance redressal mechanism in a lot of states, particularly Jharkhand, where the CAG says that a lot of reports of children falling sick after consuming midday meal food have not been reported and they have not been redressed. And so these were the very specific issues which have been found out and reported by the CAG. But we know that this scheme has been running since a lot of decades, and so a lot of generic issues are plaguing this particular scheme, which are the caste bias. As we know that caste as a social institution mandates segregation of people, especially at the time of eating, and that has plagued this scheme since the beginning. We want school children to assimilate within each other, but as soon as the food is served, the students are grouped according to their caste and the food is served. And often, people and children belonging to Dalit section, vulnerable sections, are deprived food within the premises of the school, which leads to intense discrimination. Apart from that, a general trend of decline in the enrollment of the government school, as you can see on the screen, has ensured that number of students who are benefiting from midday meal scheme is also declining. And of course, as the coverage of the government schools in rural areas will decline, of course, the students and the children who can benefit from this scheme will also decline. And so at some point of time, government has to think about extending this particular scheme to private schools also. Then just like any other government scheme, this particular scheme is also plagued with corruption. As CAG has found out that a lot of places, both quality as well as the quantity is being compromised, but the funds are being allocated from the center. So where is that fund going? And that is going nowhere but corruption, which is done through evasion. Holding the teachers primarily responsible for the administration of this scheme means that they are being diverted from their primary responsibility, and that compromises with their core activity, which is teaching. So just like their involvement in election duty, their involvement in counting of census disturbs their education, which is the main purpose, their involvement in midday meal scheme also distorts the main purpose why they are there in the schools. At the same time, we also know that some of the major changes have been made in this particular scheme, of course starting with the change in the name of the scheme itself. So midday meal scheme has been renamed as Pradhan Mantri Poshan Yojana or PM Poshan. But apart from that, some of the significant changes or alterations that have been made are as follows. First and foremost, the government has decided to include even the pre-primaries under the beneficiaries of this particular scheme. With this decision, around 24 lakh more children will be included and will be benefited from this particular scheme. So under the scheme, 24 lakh more children in pre-primary classes, which is currently covered under ICDS, will also be brought under the PM Poshan scheme. Last year, the government opened preschools called Bal Vatikas attached to Anganwadis. Apart from that, a major change that has been brought is that central government will ensure direct benefit transfer, DBT, directly to the schools. As we know that this is a centrally sponsored scheme, and so the fund for this scheme comes from both center as well as states. And so funds from both the sources will be directly transferred to the schools. So earlier the central government allocated money to the states, which then included their share of money before sending it to a nodal midday meal scheme authority at district and tehsil levels. Now funds will directly be sent to schools' account, which they will use it to cover the cooking costs. Apart from this, another major change that has happened for the first time is that honorarium for cooks and helpers will also be sent through DBT according to the new scheme. But an interesting turn of events is the appointment of nutrition expert. A nutrition expert is to be appointed in each school whose responsibility is to ensure that health aspects such as BMI, weight and hemoglobin. Also, an interesting feature that has been included is that if states want to add extra items on the menu such as milk and fruits or other nutritional items apart from vegetables, grains and pulses suggested by the center, they can do so with the center's approval so long as it falls within the allocated budget. Earlier, extra items were paid off from the state's pocket. Apart from this, a social audit of the scheme has also been mandated for each school in each state to study the implementation of the scheme, which was so far not being done by all the states. Now, let us know in the comment section what we understand by the term social audit and why is it so important for almost all the schemes. The next article that we have taken up is shifting monsoon patterns. So, the monsoon rainfall in India has been surplus by around 7% this year, though with extreme inequity. Central and southern India saw a sharp surge in rainfall. Rains in central India were surplus by 20% and in southern India by 25%, with the last month seeing several instances of flooding in Kerala, Karnataka, and Madhya Pradesh. On the other hand, large parts of UP, Bihar, Odisha have seen large deficits. The east and northeast of India have reported a 17% shortfall, and the northeast part has seen 2% shortfall. And so, the cause behind this upsurge in rainfall in our country has been attributed to La Nina and specifically the triple dip La Nina. Now, El Nino or La Nina, which is the periodic warming and cooling of surface waters in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, together known as El Nino Southern Oscillation, which basically means fluctuation of differences in temperature from Eastern and Western Pacific Ocean, which is known to trigger widespread changes in atmospheric condition and has a major influence on global weather patterns including Indian Ocean. So the La Nina refers to the Enso phase in which sea surface temperatures are cooler than the normal. So as you can see on the diagram, the blue color denotes the relatively lower temperatures, whereas the warm waters towards the Australian coast is denoted by the red color, which leads to the generation of low pressure over the coast of Australia and hence intensified rainfall in this particular region. So El Nino episodes occur more frequently and are usually associated with more impactful weather events. La Nina, on the other hand, has a longer run. That is why multi-year La Nina events, those that continue for more than 12 months, are quite common. And El Nino is more likely to be a single year event on the other hand. In recent years, El Nino of 2015 and 16 spread over 19 months was one of the longest on record and was dubbed as Godzilla due to its sustained high intensity. But the current phase of La Nina has already crossed that limit and it seems it is going to extend into third half yearly cycle, and that is why it is being dubbed as triple dip La Nina. So what is new about this triple dip La Nina? So as we have understood, while prolonged La Nina episodes are not uncommon, the current one differs from the previous two triple year event cycle in an important aspect. Both the earlier events, one starting from 1973 and ended in 1976 and the other one which started in 1998 and finished in 2001, were preceded by a strong El Nino. Prolonged La Nina events in those tenses could be explained by the fact that the amount of accumulated heat in the ocean was higher and therefore took a longer time to dissipate. In the absence of a strong El Nino preceding it, the reason for the current La Nina episode is not very clear, and that is something which is baffling all the climatologists across the globe. Let us now move on to the next news. So this last article that we are going to take up, Dasara back in full glory in the city of palaces, that is Mysore. So Dasara of Mysore is very famous. It is an annual 10 days festival that starts with the first day of Navratras, which is a 9-day celebration for the goddesses. Officially designated as a state festival Nad Habba of Karnataka, it is an entailing government funding. Dasara marks the slaying of demon Mahishasur by goddess Chamundeshwari and symbolizes the triumph of good over evil. Dasara in Mysuru is a legacy of Vijayanagar emperors, where it was called Mahanavami, and the festivities are shown in the relief artwork of the outer wall of Hazara Ram temple of Hampi. Italian traveller Niccolo di Conti described the festival's intensity and importance as a grander religious and material event with the royal support. The Wadayars of Mysore formed a kingdom in southern part of the Vijayanagar Empire and continued the tradition of Mahanavami celebration. This will be the first time the president will be inaugurating the festival, and the main place for the Dasara celebration is the Mysore Palace itself.